Good evening, everyone. Let's head over to Collectively Rewilding. For some reason, it is not. That's weird. I don't know that I care for the new update that Zoom has done for the toolbar and some of that. Some of it is easier and some of it is really weird. All right, so here we are in Collectively Rewilding, and we can head right into sustainable organic soil regeneration. We're going to actually talk about the final review of garden planners. It was just an amazing garden planner. You'll see all of those reviews are right here in Sustainable Organic Soil Regeneration in the course material as well as in the feed. It's a little easier to find in the course material though, and it's in the second unit. So we're actually going to talk about the fourth and final for cost garden planner that was in the little article that we had here. All right, this is an amazing garden planner. I really haven't gotten to tear into it as much as I would like. This is the point that I've gotten to. We're only going to plant a small area this coming year because we're going to be digging into the soil in so many different areas. All of these different places are going to be completely uprooted this coming season. Well, we're not sure, somewhere between the spring and fall of this next. I guess it is the new year. Oh gosh, it's crazy. It's already 2025. And so we will plant this area here, and we may be able to plant the trees that are planned in the fall of this year. It all depends on how well everything goes, how much everything costs, and how the timing ends up going with the digging, right? So the mulberry is already here. That's the only one of these trees that are already located. I had to just use an example tree. We plan to have avocado trees that we keep small in the Walipini or underground greenhouse, partially underground or not submerged. There's a word that I am thinking of, but it's not coming quite to mind there. So all of this will get planted, and next year we'll start digging into this area, or maybe digging into isn't the proper term, as we'll have dug into it this year. In 2026, we'll get to expand the growing area. Again, we may not go through the whole thing. It is a very time-intensive and costly prospect to increase the area that you garden. I have also been reading a book. It's the All New Square Foot Gardening book. I want to get the original. I do really like a lot of what this gentleman talks about. In fact, let me just run and grab that really quickly. All right, so this is the all new Square Foot Gardening. It's actually been out for quite some time, I believe. The first printing of this revised edition was in 2006. Really neat information. I want to get the first one because in that one, Mel Bartholomew, the author, does the math for correcting the actual soil. Well, I think his ideas in creating a structure, a very specific type of raised bed gardening, and then only working with the soil that you put into that raised bed with vermiculite and peat moss in addition to compost. I think it's a really interesting idea. As he explains, his method, which has very much been utilized by this garden planning site. All right, and let's actually show that so you guys can see. You may have to sign in. Okay, I was wondering. Now we're going to actually walk through the subscription process. I'll have to stop my share at a moment, but this is what you will get if you subscribe to the Mother Earth News Garden Planner or growveg.com garden planner. They're the same garden planner. I love Mother Earth News. It's my favorite natural publication, and I have several of their magazines and pay attention to what they're doing out there. It's a really neat, very organic and beneficial literature resource. Excellent, excellent information. So you get 1 year access, but right now they have a special for $35 or 2 years at $85, which you can only get the one at $35. So $85 would definitely be cheaper than $50 for each year. We'll go ahead and get the cheaper annual subscription, obviously. And so this is where I'll have to stop my share really quickly. I had intended to do this before class and just got busy in the other community that I work in. Let's just do this as it will be the quickest. We're almost done already. Okay, now let's share again. Oh, and I don't know why it did that. That's not what I was trying to do. Okay, so now let's go back one page and see if it starts showing. Go back again, and maybe it'll be my garden. Silly thing. All right, stop share again. Sorry, guys. This silly thing. Okay, that's why. There was one more step that I had to take. All right. Now let me pull up my actual garden and show you how the process works here. All right. Everybody's in the chat saying hi there. I've started one planner. You have all these different tools over here. They actually will answer your questions about gardening within generally 24 hours. They have live experts that work on the site and get back to you within 24 hours for your questions. For $35 a year, I don't see how you could possibly beat it, even at $50 a year. It's just an amazing deal. And I believe these are people that are just really dedicated to what they do and have as much fun as I do. So let's open our newest garden. You can also create a new garden plan so easily. I do have this already open for or already created for us, however, and this is what we'll be working on here for Collectively Rewilding. As you see, you can easily, move everything around, make it different sizes. If we go as small as we can so that you can see the overall size here, it is a decent amount to work with for a residential lot. Not quite 1/4 of an acre, but we're going to make as much out of it as we can. And then when you get into it, you have a really good amount of options. These are the options that we'll be utilizing coming this growing season. You will want to, keep track of what specific tomatoes you're growing, whether you have heirloom variety, all of that. The nasturtiums and sunflowers, this is a little bit of an experiment here to see if the nasturtiums will grow well on the sunflowers. Sunflowers, as we discussed last class, are allelopathic, or a plant that chemically releases a retardant, something to keep the other plants away. Nasturtiums are actually a little bit of a delicate plant, but as they tear through everything, while allelopathic does have this detrimental effect on other plants, everybody kind of puts them in with everything, and it seems to go okay. So I am testing that out. I want to give a little bit of space from the sunflowers and my other plants here. I have the garlic here, again, just in a couple of areas to see if, as another allelopathic plant, it's effective in if it affects these tomatoes or if it affects these peppers down here, as both are supposed to be affected by allelopathic plants, and yet so many people grow them so close together. So I want to see what the effects are. Now, I am just really getting into the ideology behind square foot gardening. I've never agreed with row gardening. I've always thought that that was a waste of space and really bad for your soil. And as the square foot gardener is always talking about so much work. Well, I enjoy the work. So that wasn't something that I really was concerned with. However, the wasted area and the really poorly managed soil quality of single row gardening, where you have no mulch, no ground cover, and just all of this wasted space between rows. It just seems like a bad idea, not to mention that you have a lot of monoculture then, where if a bug gets into a row of corn, it's got the entire row to just keep going on. Whereas when you increase your biodiversity, you really lower the likelihood that you're going to deal with bugs or diseases that affect a specific plant. It's really an excellent way to naturally get rid of some of the problems that you have to deal with in row gardening. I really don't like the ideology that goes behind row gardening. Again, Square Foot Gardener agrees with me. He just took it to a different place. When we talk about bringing life back to the soil, we're not talking about separating our growing plants from the soil that exists on the property, which is what Square Foot Gardening has as one of its base premises. I do think that having some that you add in with his mix, taking 2 organic but not typical growing elements, you have to mine them, peat moss and vermiculite. It was really interesting to go through this. I thought I had some idea of what peat was. I didn't realize how deep into the earth it goes. And when we compare peat to peat moss, I still am not sure if there's a difference there, or if it's just 2 pieces of terminology that come from different industries, because you can burn peat as well. And so you also use it, as many know, in alcohol production. It is a limited resource. It is finite. It doesn't continuously produce itself, as is vermiculite. I'm not as familiar with the components of vermiculite, but it is another type of substance from a previously existing ecosystem that's left behind these remnants of itself, and they have to, again, mine it in order to get it ready for you for your garden. They're very porous, these things, and they'll hold the water very nicely in the soil mix that the Square Foot Gardener recommends. However, it would be very costly, as he talks about, to do it for the size of what a single row garden takes up, right? I remember that my grandmother's single row garden, she had 2 of them. They were probably at least 30 to 40 square feet, close to. They were both rectangles, not perfect squares, but there was a lot of space between those 2 gardens. Now, my grandparents had 8 children, and for large portions of the time they were raising their children, they were using those gardens to put food into the house. They canned and did all of this stuff, right? However, had those gardens been turned into square foot gardening, there would have been even more production. Now, my grandparents were a little bit older than most of the grandparents that are from my age group, and they were born in 1912 and 1913, respectively, I think. It was a while ago, and they had a different mindset, and they come from a different set of abilities. When they were regenerating the soil on their property, it was a brand new property, so it had all been torn up in building the homes in that little neighborhood, and it was really probably not the best quality soil. May have even been dirt, not classified as soil. They didn't know the consequences or really think about it beyond the fact that it was a free resource. And they went up into the mountains and they took out some of the topsoil from the forest. and just brought it home and added it to their garden. We're not legally allowed to do that. And we know a lot more about the consequences of everybody just without any real reservation going out and taking resources at that level from the ecosystem out in our natural parks and things like that, right? So that is how they amended their soil. They did use some chemical components as they got older, and I was actually a part of their life. I did see a few chemical treatments in their garage, but it wasn't a big part of their gardening process. However, they never mulched their garden plots. So to me, their soil always looked so unhealthy in their garden plots, even though they were able to produce very healthy plants. To me, bare soil looks damaged. It looks like it needs a Band-Aid. It looks like it needs a cover, whether that's a plant or pine needles or bark. You know, if you go into a forest, there's a variety of covers. You have the detritus from the leaves and the plants that grow each year and shed their leaves or die off and come back again the next year. And you also have the plants that are the lower growing plants. You don't generally just see exposed soil. And if you've ever taken a moment and dug your fingers into healthy forest soil, you'll notice how soft it is, how easy to dig your fingers it is, and how porous it is, instead of this tightly compacted soil that we generally see, especially in our industrialized agriculture, but even in our home gardens. And that's something else that the square foot gardener talks about, is the fact that with his method, you aren't walking through the garden. You're walking around these square foot planters. There was just a really good picture. Let me show that to you guys to give you an idea of what it would look like. All right. So you have these nice little boxes, and you can grow a variety of things in them. He's got a lot of flowers in most of them. You can see back here in some of these further back planters, there's some more vegetable producing type of plant structure, it looks like. And so it's really very interesting how many different traditional methods of gardening that the square foot gardener and I tore apart, but the very different ways that we went about creating a solution to those problems. I think that his is very good for beginning gardeners, for people that don't want to invest a lot of time, don't have a lot of time to invest, only want a small area. I think this is a brilliant, brilliant plan. The square foot gardener is actually called square foot gardening, all new square foot gardening. Really excellent methods. And in fact, for a couple of my neighbors, that's how I'm going to recommend that they start. It'll be something very easy for two single people that both have jobs and also are getting to an age where maybe they don't want to do a lot of digging and stooping and hauling and lifting, right? So I think that this would be a very excellent method for those two neighbors that lived on this block. And I am going to incorporate some of it into this space here, in that I will add some of those components to all of the spaces that we intend to garden in. We are going to add rocks, as there's going to be plenty when we're doing our digging, and there already are quite a few exposed on the property. We're going to add rocks to outline these beds so that we don't walk in them, so that it's easier to teach the dogs to stay out of them, and all of these different pieces. And I think that we're going to incorporate his grid system in it. I think it does look very nice. And I think also it gives you a very clear idea of where to put your seeds, where you've got your seeds. And you can also even do things like write on your grid, as he mentioned. Then he put together a graph that shows what large plants need space-wise, extra large, large, medium, and small, according to his sizing. I find that it's pretty accurate, especially if you're going to manicure things like your peppers and tomatoes, because if you don't manicure them, tomatoes will certainly take much more than 1 square foot up of your garden. However, if you do put them in a cage, yes, that is a little bit how I feel about it, but I think that there's some value to it as I keep going on and considering what I want and how I want to do that in a smaller space, not in a bigger property such as what my parents have. in Colorado, they have, I think, a little over 3 acres. You have a lot more room to let a tomato just go wild. However, trimming out the excess foliage on your tomato will actually make it more productive in creating tomatoes. And I did just read an article about the fact that if you just trim off the blossoms towards the end when you know the frost is coming and you're thinking already of having a bunch of green tomatoes that you may or may not be able to find a use for, if you trim up all the blossoms, which are obviously never going to come to fruition, just trim off all of those blossoms, the remaining tomatoes will ripen at an incredible rate, and many of them will be ready before that first frost, and you won't just have a bunch of green tomatoes. So these are all things to consider when we're working in our garden. And so where I really differentiate from what the square foot gardener or Mel Bartholomew believes in is I don't want to just continuously look at the resources around me and think, how can I take something from the planet and put it where I'm at to benefit me? Now, I will say that the square foot gardener is very conscientious, and he talks about making this work for the life of your garden. The only thing that you're ever supposed to add after you put together the original mix and build your little square foot garden boxes is compost that you hopefully are creating yourself if you have the space, right? He's not talking about an endless drain on resources that don't come from this property. I think that he's very conscientious of that, and I'm not trying to criticize him. However, I believe in benefiting the actual soil that I am interacting with. I want to help to restore some of the natural components to the soil that I interact with, as well as, yes, as human beings, we modify our environment. There are other creatures that do this. We're not alone. We're certainly the most obvious people, or the most obvious creatures that modify our environment. And it's something that we all have to consider when we're interacting with our environment, what sorts of impact we want to have, if we want to minimize our impact, and if we want to leave behind something more positive than we received, right? That's a really big topic around anything in the agricultural or environmental world at this time. And let me just turn that down. Normally I don't for work, but it is going a little crazy over there. And so I did not see this. To me, it looked like it was already set in the square foot gardening method, but now reading the book so much over the past few days, I see that that's exactly what they're talking about. And so if I turn that on, they're going to very specifically outline what I can and cannot do. And so that is definitely not what I want to do. And so I'm going to turn that right back off. All right. All of these things, though, in this planner make it very, very versatile, very beautiful. I'm not the most artistic sort, but in the examples on growveg.com, and let me just show you those as I did finally figure out, I think it was on GrowVeg. If not, it's on Mother Earth News. And they showed some examples. In fact, I printed them up because I really thought some of them were just exquisite, and they really showed I believe this is going to show it without going right into, no, it's not going to, darn it. All right, let me go to an incognito browser. No, let me just switch browsers entirely. And then we're just going to search Mother Earth News, Garden Planner, and show you these gorgeous plans that other people who have purchased this plan have created with it. And now they've taken it away. Oh, that is so frustrating. I figured out the other day where these beautiful examples were, and now it looks like they might have gotten rid of them. Perhaps it's on this page, though. All right, well, I did print them because I thought they were gorgeous, and I wanted to utilize them as an example, while I was putting all of this together, let me just find those in my paperwork here. And at least you'll get an idea of how beautiful some of these gardens were that people put together. I mean, isn't that just so beautiful? That was my absolute favorite. And they incorporated a pizza oven just out of like shapes that were available. Some really neat pieces. Somebody here put together just some really nice designs. And all of this can be done utilizing that garden planner there. This is another one I really like. That idea of the wheel, you can see they have some things that are a little bit out of there, but primarily this wheel garden. So many different neat ways that we can organize our garden, right? And so I won't go through all of them. This is a very prolific garden. Really, really neat what you can do. You can make it any size, and you can make multiple stages within your harvest. Just some really, really interesting things that you can go through and do here. All right. And so, oh, no, we were over here. When we're amending the soil naturally where we are, do we want to amend it for more native plants, or do we want to amend it for more garden style human edible plants? Those are, again, all considerations that we'll take. And so the reason that I want to get the old square foot gardening book as opposed to this all new method is at that stage, he was still working with the top like 6 or 12 inches of the soil that was already where he was. And that's going to have a lot of different pieces that are dealing with the pH. And I really like how he's broken everything down in this book, and math is not my favorite subject. So I want to tear through his older book to get the pieces that he no longer considers necessary in his new method, as I want to dig into the idea of, I don't really like digging into the soil much. We are placing wood chips over all of it right now to start that retention process for water in the soil and soften it up. Having the especially non-manicured wood chips with all of the detritus, all of the breakdown of leaves and juniper fronds and all of this different material that's breaking down already will increase the life that's within the soil here on the property. Though there's not much, that little bit that's there, we'll take what we're putting on there and run with it. And so the soil is already much softer that we've managed to get wood chips on through this area right here. We weren't really exactly sure what we were going to do because we had so much digging to do over this next season, but we definitely wanted to do some gardening. And after we got everything planned out and put down on paper, it was really clear that the only area that we'll be able to garden this year is this that we won't be disturbing below a retaining wall and a little pavilion that's already built here. We will structure, and again, it's so easy to accidentally grab those, and all you have to do is put Control V or the undo button, and it goes right back to where you want it. Just really, really neat, fun things that you can do with this garden planner. All right, everybody. That was a pretty in-depth coverage of both the square foot gardening method as well as this garden planner. And actually, let's go right back to that. One of the other areas that we'll be utilizing the square foot gardening method when we go into, it's easier to see here, when we go into areas like this ground cherry and the passion fruit vine surrounded by marjoram, incorporating this idea of the square foot garden is also that you can cover these smaller areas, whether you're covering them for shade or from protection from a severe windstorm, from frost, extending your growing season, both earlier than you might have tried and later than you might have tried. All of these different things, these smaller spaces allow you to build little temporary or permanent structures to cover them. When you get into this area even, it wouldn't be outrageous to build a removable frame that can do different things. I really believe in letting the bugs play their part in a garden, but many people don't like that. And so you can add frames that keep out the majority of bugs during certain important periods in your garden. Again, you can add shade, all of that. And it's something that you can put on and take off as it benefits your garden space. Really, really interesting thing. Also, adding those grid features really does make it stand out and look very nice. Now, when we're going to put all of the little parts that we are going to put into in the areas that we're going to garden, from then on, we too will just be adding compost. And that is why we have the compost heap right here, the compost pile. It is such an amazing thing to create your own soil, not to have to buy it, and also to get probably a much higher quality product. And my gardener has talked about it recently, and he's finding filler material when he's talking about compost and the substandard quality of many of the brands that he checked out. The square foot gardener talks about another element, and that's the byproduct aspect of many of the pieces of mulch that we go out and buy, or excuse me, not mulch, compost. The pine shavings from one industry, he had some really good examples. I'll have to go through and highlight that for you guys. I'd never considered it from this element, but from companies that would deal with cork, the byproducts that might be there, or from the cattle industry, all these different pieces. And when you get the compost from these different sources, there's only going to be 1 to 2 elements in that compost because they're using it as a byproduct so that they can take what's essentially their waste and turn it into another product to sell to us, as also being much better for the environment to spread that out. My grandfather had a logging mill, and a different grandfather, he never even considered it. I'm sure it wasn't even a worry that would have entered his mind. And he just dumped all of the pine and wood shavings that would come from his logging mill into the canyon. He actually set his building up on the edge of the canyon so that all of that could just get dumped back there. And now, of course, we know that that was a horrible idea. It wouldn't be legal. You would have to do something with that waste. And it changed the ecosystem of that area of the canyon. And for some way down, I'm sure, has still maybe caused problems for some of that ecosystem. It's something that we all have to be aware of. When we buy these products, there are going to be consequences. When we continually develop land, there's going to be consequences. How much do you want to be a part of solving some of the problems that we're creating by the ways that we live as human beings? And that's what soil regeneration is all about. Not just taking from another place and purchasing, buying resources and taking those resources from another location to add to your own so that you don't ever have to worry about what your actual practices are, and creating a functioning ecosystem that is in a natural life cycle on your own property, because it is something that can be done. My husband really likes to talk about what happened with our last property. After we had been there for a full year and it started in on the second growing season, there were, of course, some of those that we don't desire as much, the gnats that came out. There were mosquitoes, not in large quantities or anything. There was no stagnant water, so it was just a normal amount of all of these different types of low-level flying insects that then the dragonflies came and swarmed. I've never seen so many dragonflies on a residential property in one area. It was amazing. There would be up to maybe 30 to 50 dragonflies flying through the air, eating the mosquitoes and the gnats. And then not too long after that, you'd see the swallows and the small birds come in and start feeding on all of that bug life. So that is what I mean by an ecosystem that you can actually see working on your own property. When you take steps to incorporate living soil, and especially some native and pollinator friendly flora into your garden, you will actually start seeing the effects in the health of multiple layers of that ecosystem. Excuse me. I get so excited talking about it. I don't think to drink. I don't do anything. I just start tearing apart all of these different thoughts that so many different places are putting out and have had. And I have a book from the 70s. And for once, I can actually just go and pull it out. Oh, I love having my books back out. This is the book that really cemented how I think about the use of soil. As a child, I didn't like the way single row gardening looked, as we've discussed. But this book really talks about the damage that we do to our soil by continuously tilling them, our soils, by continuously tilling them and compacting them with the tillers, with the tractors, with the harvesting machines, all of the different things that we are constantly compacting the soil while then tearing it up. I used to constantly talk to people about how the soil is structured like our own bodies. When you have your skin, there are, I think, at least 10 layers just within the actual skin itself. And then you get into all of the different structures that make up the flesh of your body. And the soil is quite like that. It starts off with its topsoil, it has the subsoil, it has all of these different layers. And when you till into that, it's like taking a fork that's really sharp and just tearing through the skin of your body over and over again. And what does it do? It scabs. And we actually create scabs on the earth by constantly breaking up the soil structure. And that's what you see in the agricultural lots that are dry and bare and they're cracking almost in a chain link pattern. That is a very visible, very damaged picture of what tilling does to the soil. We don't want to tear into our bodies. We don't want to tear into the earth's body any more than we have to. Now, soil can become so compacted and so lacking in nutrients that it is inaccessible even to hardy weeds like dandelions. And at that point, even in the natural world, eventually the movements of the earth or a hill crumbling down or animals trampling over it, something would loosen that damaged top layer that is so compacted, and it would make it accessible then again to what we consider weeds, things like dandelions and thistles and some of those really hardy plants that we try to avoid are actually Mother Nature's band-aids. They come out and they heal the damaged or broken up soil structures that they come across. When their seeds are out there blowing in the wind, they're looking for that torn up, messed up soil to grab into and cover and begin to heal so that other plants will then come and follow in their turn and in their cycle. And so when you are attempting to heal the soil without tearing it up, one of the best ways is to put out a cover. And so that's what we did with this wood mulch. And this book talks about all the different ways, even back in the, I believe, early 70s, that these folks were looking at changing traditional so-called farming, because they were also talking about the agricultural processes that are beginning to become more and more and more prevalent in our food system, as well as actual traditional farming that is still single row gardening from eons ago. Okay. And this was in 1974. Excellent, excellent book. The Owner Built Homestead. I highly recommend it. Go check it out. Thriftbooks.com probably has some in stock. I think it's an amazing book. And they talk about allowing the weeds to come into these devastated areas and how they work with them slowly over a period of time to introduce plants that are more desirable and that are perennials and native plants, as well as the desirable annuals and things like that. And it's just a beautiful ideology. And so all of these things that are floating around out there that I've managed to come across are going to be incorporated as appropriate into the gardening methodology that we use here in Collectively Rewilding as an experiment. And that's one of the main reasons that I am really excited about incorporating the Natural Resources Conservation Service into this whole process, because they track all of these things. And where they find positive things, they can make more of that and they can introduce it to others and they can grow this beyond what I can do, no matter how big Collectively Rewilding goes. The Natural Resources Conservation Service Center is already located in every single one of the 50 states, and I believe all of our territories. It is an amazing resource, and it's really something that we can utilize as citizens to interact with, both to fund our projects and to show what we can do that is a more sustainable method in our own gardening. All right. It's really, I think, a tremendous resource that we as citizens don't make use of. And it's something that's a time-honored tradition in our country, where we share the knowledge that we get from the experiences that we have with the appropriate governmental body, so that they can take that research and maximize its benefit, right? It's something that's a pretty neat thing in itself. All right, guys, we are almost out of time. I get a little bit carried away. Does anybody have any questions? Anything about this planner? Anything about any of the different ideas that we talked about during this topic, during this class? Anything about gardening that you want to throw out there? Anything at all?
Benny has a question in the chat.
I was just checking that out. So Benny asked, what methods are most effective for regenerating soil organically? And Benny, that's where you're just going to find a lot of conjecture. And I really feel like when we're out there doing this, we don't know what is going to be the best method to fix what we've broken. And that's why I think going with what feels right for your area, for your soil, for your property, and then really noticing what works better, what areas tend to draw more beneficial insect life, what areas don't flourish or draw more negative insect life. Doing little things like checking out whatever is your particular interest, but how the allelopathic plants affect or don't affect nearby plants. Checking into different methods like managing your soil through more long-term methods, right? If you decide, I'm going to go with the square foot gardening method, or I'm just going to bring in soil and amend this area, that is going to be a much quicker fashion. If you really want to interact with the soil that you have on your property, yes, you'll be bringing some things in if you're able to. There are ways to do it without bringing anything in. If you just start composting your own kitchen scraps, that's another great thing that the square foot gardening method talks about, all the different areas in your own community where you may be able to go and get organic or non-organic, depending on the source, food scraps that are appropriate, and garden clippings or wood shavings, all of these different things that you could for free add to your compost heap. You could theoretically do it without at least purchasing removed resources from another area. When you're not going to do it exclusively from what you can create from your own kitchen byproduct and such, you will be taking some resources from outside. For ours, we're trying to stay as close as possible to not taking resources from another area. And so we got wood chips from a local tree cutting company that would have just typically thrown their wood shavings in the landfill, and they would have had to pay for that. And then it would have caused all the problems that all of the things in our landfills do, right? There's just so many different negative elements to that. And that is going to take still time, right? And so if we wanted to speed that process up, we could have dug into the soil. We did that when we were on the last rental that we were on, because you're only in a rental for a limited amount of time. We didn't have the same amount of time to work with the soil. So we took a little hand tiller and we dug up the whole backyard that had pretty much died, and the soil was dead. It wasn't cracking, but it was completely hardened, nothing living in it, just muddy mess, wasting the topsoil when the rains came. And dug into that, and then added garlic, excuse me, clover and wood chips over that area to get it to have ground cover, putting nitrogen into the soil. Clover is an excellent beginning plant if you have no life to your soil, because it's going to take root relatively easily and be able to not only grow off of limited nutrients, but then add a lot of nitrogen into your soil, which is a positive, especially if your soil is completely dead, as it was on that last property that we were renting. And so let me just take a quick peek at your question there again. There's also things like growing ground covers. If you want to avoid lawns, right, then you can do things like putting thyme out. If you're not going to be walking on it, there are ornamental thymes that are just glorious, that'll cover your ground. If you want to have something that you can kind of mow over, but you don't want a traditional lawn, you can do feverfew and some of the other flowers that when you mow over them, they just become a compactor version of themselves. They'll actually even have little miniature flowers. It's really cute, but it doesn't destroy the plant. And you can put that on your ground cover. You need a ground cover, essentially. I really like hay. My parents did not prefer it as a ground cover. Hay is a great ground cover that's inexpensive and will break down relatively quickly and begin putting nutrients back into your soil. That's amazing, Benny. He says he has close to an acre in his front and backyard when he puts it all together, and he would love to come up with a good plan. If you're interested in purchasing a garden planner, as we said, right now, this is only $35 for the entire year. You can map out or measure out your acreage and then come in and just start playing with it on here. I would encourage you to think about breaking that up into more manageable sizes. And you probably will want to start with a portion, right? It's a big expenditure. It's a big effort. It takes time, all of these things. When you're looking at a big property, unless you're going to be putting a lot of money into it, or that's all you have to do for the entire, I cannot talk tonight, spring to fall season, right? You might approach a larger area. But I would really think about what you can do with what types of time constraints and labor constraints. Maybe your partner, maybe your family, maybe your roommates, maybe you have friends or neighbors who want to participate, all of these different things, and decide on a reasonable area that you can control. And also, really, what the Square Foot Gardener talks about is how much time the traditional methods of single row gardening take. And you want to look at that. Do you want to create something that doesn't take as much time? Outside of the square foot gardening method, one of the elements that I'm going to be incorporating here on this property is that of a food forest. And a food forest is quite exactly like what it sounds. You want to have a canopy. So you want to have a few trees. We have some aspens that we have to get rid of, and a white spruce, perhaps a plum, if when we get the competing aspen away from that plum, if it starts flowering and fruiting, we'll keep that. If not, I don't think it is. I think it's an ornamental plum. Unfortunately, that one will have to go. We're going to put in a cherry tree in that area. We have some ornamental pear trees that, again, will most likely probably go, but if they don't compete with the peach trees, we may leave one, and then we'll put a smaller dwarf cherry where the other ornamental pear is, with an olive tree an almond tree, and a mulberry tree in the back, as well as the medium level canopy with rose bushes, raspberry bushes, blueberry canes, which is really interesting how blueberries grow. All of these different things that create the high to medium canopy working down into your 2 foot, 3 foot, 1 foot ground cover, all of these different levels of plants. And you do that over about a 10-year period of time, depending on the size, depending on the time you're able to put into it, all of these different things. It generally takes about 10 years of pretty intensive effort to get the whole property interacting together and functioning almost like a forest. Again, we're humans and we modify things, so it's a forest-like environment. And then once you've gotten it all established with heirloom annuals that are reseeding themselves every year, and perennials, and the trees that are putting off whatever types of fruit, nuts that you may have in your area. I don't know, an olive would be a pit fruit as well, right? There are no vegetables that I'm aware of that grow on trees. Fruit are the production of trees, right? Nuts have a protein element, and I really like that. That's why I wanted to incorporate an almond tree here on the property. There are so many other nuts that I would love to incorporate, the hickory nuts, and I love pinyon trees, and there are just so many types that would be wonderful. But when you're on a residential plot, you have a limited amount of area, and you also want to look at how much shade each of those trees are going to put into your property. That's another thing that I keep doing that I like about this garden planner. It's not probably exact, but this area that they've got grayed out here, that's where you wouldn't want to put any other trees or anything competing like that. And it's also where you're going to have, like at noon, a large portion of what your shade cover will look like when that tree is fully mature. And so you want to look at that when you are planting your trees. You want to have trees that are close enough that they can communicate well through the soil. We have the mulberry here, and then we'll have the olive tree here with also the semi-subterranean. That's what I was looking for there. Semi-subterranean Wally Peony style greenhouse. Those trees will be in the ground, and their root structures will communicate with the other trees and plants that are in the garden outside, right? The only tree that we'll have that won't be able to participate in that part of the element of the garden will be the lemon tree we're going to have in our greenhouse front porch area. That will be in a potted planting container, some sort of gargantuan thing, even though it'll be a dwarf lemon tree, and we'll also keep it manicured so that it fits nicely on our little front porch. It won't be in the actual soil, so it won't be able to communicate with the other plants, which will keep it from having the utmost health that it could have, because plants really do best when they're in the actual soil and they're able to communicate with the other plants nearby. It's really quite beautiful. One of the things that we'll do to further that process will be to go out and purchase the packets of, and I can never remember the name, I'm not even going to try, but there's a type of fungi that you can purchase in a powder form and add to your water, and you put it out throughout your garden when you know that your soil isn't communicating with itself, when it's so close to dead soil as our backyard is. We'll introduce that fungi that helps the soil be essentially a communication media for all of the plants. They interact, they tell each other when there's a bug infestation, they tell each other when conditions are better, all these different beautiful things that plants are telling each other. Much of that happens through the soil. It also happens through chemicals that are released into the air and a variety of different things. But your soil is your base, and you really are not going to have the healthiest garden that you could have if you haven't worked on the health of your soil. So those are some elements that you can do. People talk about lasagna gardening, Benny, and lasagna gardening is an interesting concept. I may incorporate some small elements of that here in this garden, but one of the problems that I really have with lasagna gardening, and that's where you go down and you remove a couple of layers of your soil, and then you add in compost, and cardboard is one of the main components. You layer cardboard and compost, cardboard will biodegrade, the proper types of cardboard without, colorful printing all over it, and that don't have a lot of adhesives in it, as some of those adhesives may not be very good for your garden. You also, in addition, need to create perforations throughout all of those cardboard pieces so that the plants can begin working through that and starting to tear it up and aid in the decomposition process of that cardboard within your garden. But that's a pretty quick way of going about it. So lasagna gardening, I think we have some information on that in Collectively Rewilding. Let me just check for you really quickly. I wish it would take away my characters while I'm typing. That is so frustrating. This one, it probably talks about it. And as you can see right away, I'm like, be careful when you read these gardening hacks. But there are lots of problems with many of them. Some of them may or may not be all right if you do some modification or have some knowledge about how to better implement them. Some of them are just a bad idea right out the door. So be aware of that. But lasagna gardening is a very reasonable process that you can consider to speed things up. I'll add this one here for you, Benny, in the overall collective or in organic soil regeneration, sustainable organic soil regeneration. More. All right, and so that will be in there for you to check out. And we have just a couple minutes left. You've added some fungi to your garden before as well. That's excellent, Benny. It's really a great place to relatively inexpensively, with a lot of long-lasting effect, begin to work with your soil and your composting as well, Benny. That's excellent. Really wonderful. Let me just check your initial. So most effective, that is really going to be a subjective question. There are a lot of different methods out there. The quickest thing to easily do is to put some sort of mulch on it. Again, I always recommend getchipdrop.com. Let's throw that one up there as well, because that is either a completely free resource or a very low cost resource if you try to increase your odds and speed with getting a chip drop on your property. Getchipdrop.com, simply a fabulous resource, right? Here. Another great way to look is through your local extension offices. Many times you can get free trees even. So let's just check out if, and I'm sorry, Benny, I always think you're in Arizona, but you said that you were in a completely different part of the country, I believe. Oops, wrong thing here. Oh, okay. So you've had some mushrooms in your yard. That is actually indicative of some pretty good health in your yard. And then we'll just look up here locally, the Utah extension. Put it up there. And then trees, and see if that'll pop anything up. They have a store. That's not really what I'm looking for. I know that the county extension office in my hometown sometimes would just hand out seeds or little saplings. And so again, your local extension office, your county cooperative office, they're both really excellent places to make contact. They have a lot of great knowledge about your area, and they do sometimes give out free resources for your garden. And it's a great place to talk to them about what works well in your area for different trees and things like that. If you say wanted to establish that food forest, and having almost an acre, you can definitely do more than what we're able to do with even this decent sized residential property, right? If you want to add a few more trees, you're certainly able to do that. All right, everyone. It is time to shut class down today. Thank you all. I have so much fun talking about this topic. I hope you guys have as much fun as I do. And I loved getting to answer your questions there, Benny. So much fun. We did cancel Simply Stitches. I won't get that class started back up again until I have better equipment to show what I'm doing with my hands. We will only be meeting every other week. If any of you have any suggestions for classes you'd like to see, I'd love to fill that every other week slot up. Hope to see you guys all next week and have a wonderful week. Thank you, everyone. Good night, guys.
Good night, Sabrina. I'll see you later.
Good night, Tammy. Bye, everyone. See you next week.